Disappearing armies, abandoned palaces, lost cities, cloak merchants traded in magic, the Persian empires of the ancient world were steeped in strange stories and intrigue. I mean, how does an entire army vanish in the desert? How did a bunch of Roman soldiers somehow find their way to China after a Persian defeat? What about the story of the guy with two snakes that grew from his shoulders that ate the brains of young men? What kind of creepy metaphor is that? Here are some of the eeriest stories from the Persian Empire. The Lost Army of Cambyses.
In the year 525 BC, the first iteration of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, was at the height of its power. Its leader, Cambyses II, was looking to expand. His father, Cyrus the Great, had founded the empire, and Cambyses had ambitions to turn it into a juggernaut. He set his sights on Egypt and its wealth and resources. Now, Cambyses was known to have a bit of a temper, and when an Egyptian oracle told him that Egypt was off limits, well, he went in for the kill.
The Siwa Oasis was a remote and sacred place that was revered by the Egyptians. It was deep in the desert near the modern-day border of Egypt and Libya, only reachable by a perilous week-long trek across a barren landscape. The Oracle of Amun, who lived there, was the type of mysterious and powerful guy you'd normally think of when you hear Oracle of fill-in-the-blank. His prophecies were respected and feared. His words to Alexander the Great a couple hundred years after Cambyses in 334 BC apparently helped legitimize his conquest of Egypt. But when the oracle proclaimed that Cambyses II had no legitimate claim to the throne, the proud king was offended, and nothing good usually happens when a proud king gets offended. He decided to send a massive army to destroy the oracle and the insignificant Egyptian gods he represented. Insignificant to Cambyses, that is. Cambyses sent a colossal force, 50,000 strong, made up of the finest soldiers the Persian Empire had to offer. They were decked out with the best weapons and armor of the time, and their morale was high, fueled by confidence instilled after a series of victories over the empires and the prospect of conquering the world. As Cambyses' army marched through the harsh terrain of the Egyptian desert, things started to get a little weird. The desert wasn't a place for the weak. It was a landscape of deadly extremes, scorching heat by day and freezing cold by night. Water was scarce, and the endless expanse of sand stretched in all directions. It was a monotonous and disorienting landscape.
Then, according to one theory, there was chaos. As the army was halfway to Siwa, a monster of a sandstorm rushed towards them. When the wind died down and the sand settled, there was nothing but more sand. The army was gone, vanished without a trace. It was as if the desert opened up and swallowed them whole. There were no survivors as far as we know. It kind of makes you want to head out there, though, and find out what happened.
The disappearance of this great army has become one of the most baffling mysteries of the ancient world. Were they just buried under feet of sand after a freak storm, or was there some divine intervention, a punishment from the gods for thinking they could challenge the sacred oracle? Probably the first one, but hey, who knows? The Parthian-Roman-Chinese connection.
The Battle of Carrhae, fought in 53 BC between Rome and the Parthian Empire, the second great Persian Empire, was a bloodbath for the Romans. Parthian archers, led by General Serena, tore the Roman legions apart, and more than 20,000 soldiers perished, including Rome's wealthiest and perhaps most influential man, Marcus Licinius Crassus. But did some of the Roman survivors end up fighting in the Parthian army and eventually found a city in China?
It's said that after the Parthians offed Crassus, they poured molten gold down his throat, as they enjoyed doing. I mean, check out the other video on Persian rules to learn more about that. They then used his severed head to reenact a Greek play in front of the Parthian king, Orestes II. Wholesome fun for the whole family. 10,000 Roman soldiers were also taken prisoner. The Parthians often absorbed soldiers they conquered into their own army, giving them money and nice new Persian army and weapons. Meanwhile, the Chinese Han Dynasty was expanding its influence in Central Asia. The Silk Road, a lifeline connecting east and west, was buzzing with tales of the great battle and the fate of the Roman legionnaires. Well, maybe not buzzing, but rumors were spreading. Caravans and travelers brought stories of Roman soldiers posing as Persians into the courts and bazaars of Han China. Some years later, Rome asked for its captured soldiers back, but the Parthians said, "What captured soldiers?" It seems like they disappeared as completely as Cambyses' army in the Egyptian desert.
But maybe, just maybe, there were Roman-turned-Parthian soldiers slinking east. There's a theory that many of them were deployed to the eastern frontiers of the Parthian Empire to defend against the Han in their ongoing skirmishes over control of the Silk Road. Maybe they made it even further and defected into the Han Dynasty altogether.
In a small village in China named Liqian years later, the locals seemed to bear unusual features, distinct from their neighbors. The village became the center of a legend that these were the descendants of the lost Roman legion. It's a story that blurred the lines between history and myth for sure. There's been no concrete evidence to prove the connection, but still, it's a fascinating mystery to bat around. Demons and founding an empire.
A lot of ancient Persian mythology is connected to Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest organized religions around. The third great Persian empire, the Sasanian Empire, was founded in 224 AD by a guy named Ardashir I, who conquered the Parthians, maybe with the help of evil spirits called divs, some of Persia's most feared and horrific spirits. I mean, they were described as giants with horns and bore tusks for teeth who had a hankering for human flesh. I guess it would help to have them on your side if you wanted to build an empire of your own, or maybe a couple of empires.
Ardashir was born into a noble family in Persis, what's now modern-day Fars, Iran. He was a descendant of a guy named Sasan, who was the high priest of a Zoroastrian temple. Ardashir quickly became disillusioned with the Parthian rule, which at the time was led by Artabanus VI. Artabanus had just offed his own brother to take control of the empire, but internal problems and pressures from the Roman Empire were threatening to tear it apart. Ardashir would finish the job. From his position as commander of a fort in Paris, Ardashir quickly gathered a following, raised an army, and started conquering surrounding cities. But sometime before that, there was a legend that he went to seek help from the dark side, as it were, and found that help in the form of an evil div. It goes something like this. One night, maybe under a starlit sky in the Persian desert near Pars, Ardashir went out alone into the ancient ruins of a forgotten temple, a place where people only whispered about, a place where demons lived. In a dark corner of the temple stood a div. It was a terrifying sight. The giant demon had glowing red eyes and bore tusks for teeth. It was a giant, the kind of thing that made those orcs from Lord of the Rings look like male models from a cover of Men's Health magazine. Even though his pants might have been a bit wet, Ardashir stood his ground. He was an ambitious guy and knew that this div demon thing could be his ticket to the big time. The div started speaking, probably in a deep, deep voice that made the stone to the ancient ruins shake like they were about to topple for a second time. This div apparently said something like, "Mortal, why do you seek the company of the divs? We're the bad guys here, remember? You fear us and revile us, etc., etc." Did he really say etc., etc.? Then Ardashir replied with something along the lines of, "Great Spirit, I come seeking the power to fulfill my destiny. I wish to overthrow the corrupt Parthian rule and bring a new order to this land," etc., etc.
The div cocked his head and looked at Ardashir like a father might look at a 3-year-old child who tells him that he can eat 100 hamburgers in one sitting. "Sure, dude, let's see it." Maybe the div then said something like, "Mortal, your ambition is great, and it amuses me. I shall grant you my aid. But know this, the path to power is perilous, etc., etc. You get the idea. I'm paraphrasing here, by the way.
With these words, the div gave Ardashir the knowledge of all kinds of ancient warfare techniques and secrets of the land that only spirits knew. It gave him strength and aura that made men willing to follow him into the fires of battle. With the help of the div, but also mostly with the help of his well-trained military and strategic skills, Ardashir successfully overthrew the Parthian king, Artabanus IV, in a series of battles. His victory at the Battle of Hormozgan in AD 224 was the final nail in the coffin for the Parthians. After the victory, Ardashir declared himself as Shahanshah, or King of Kings of Persia, and laid the foundations for the Sasanian Empire, an empire that would last until the Islamic conquest of the 7th century. Legend of the Zahak.
One of the eeriest stories from ancient Persia has to do with how power corrupts, how serious deception can be, and that greed doesn't pay off. Oh, and there's a guy with brain-eating snakes slithering out of his shoulders. But even though it's just a story, it captures the history and overall vibe of the Persian empires pretty well.
The legend of Zahak comes from the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings, an epic poem written by a Persian poet named Ferdowsi around the year 1000 AD. It chronicles the history of the Persian Empire, from its mythical beginnings to the Arab conquest that toppled the Sasanians. Zahak's story starts with his father, Murdas. Murdas is a noble king, and his son Zahak was corrupted by Ahriman, who's basically the devil incarnate in Zoroastrianism. Ahriman appears to Zahak disguised as a charming young man. Ahriman convinces Zahak to murder his own father and take the throne. Sounds like something a devil would do. Once Zahak becomes king, Ahriman, still in disguise, cozies up to Zahak even more and persuades the new king to let him kiss his shoulders. What kind of Mac Daddy stuff was that? When he does, 2 black snakes sprout from the spots where Ahriman kissed. The snakes were immortal and couldn't be killed. As soon as Zahak cut the head off of one, another one sprang up in its place. Ahriman keeps on with his terrorizing of this poor king. He tells Zahak that the only way to make the snakes happy is to feed them the brains of men. Zahak's reign then turns into one of terror as he keeps feeding the snakes brains to satisfy their hunger and make sure he remains king. The story of Zahak is a cautionary tale of tyranny and evil. The snakes growing from Zahak's shoulders are said to represent the ever-present and unending nature of greed and corruption. People will do anything to stay in power. Zahak was willing to sacrifice nearly all the men in his kingdom to do just that.
The end of Zahak's tyranny came at the hands of a blacksmith named Kaveh. Kaveh had lost a bunch of his sons to Zahak's snakes and was understandably unhappy with the emperor. Kaveh led a revolt against Zahak, rallying the people with his blacksmith's apron as a banner. It's a symbol that would become a representation of resistance against oppression in Persian culture. Kaveh's uprising led to the liberation of the people from Zahak's rule and the rise of Feridun, who was a way better guy than Zahak and wasn't being given bad advice by the devil.
Thanks for watching. What other eerie stories from other civilizations do you want to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Nutty History.